Hi, everyone, and welcome to our second session of today. This is going to be our usual Sunday talk within the nine-sided circle. I'm one of your hosts, Noor Kyle.
And I'm the other one of your hosts, Mushtaq Ali.
You know, I don't think we even said that this morning.
No, we didn't. We were so excited to do what we were doing that we just jumped right in.
Yeah. Okay. So we already kind of did our YouTube spiel, but I guess
we're
we could
do
do
it
like
again because there's different people looking up.
That's true. Different people.
I'll talk fast.
Go for it.
Okay. So real quick, please. What are we talking? Oh, yes, new YouTube. Welcome to YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, we would be incredibly grateful if you subscribe to our channel, and we will remember you to God, which is no small thing. So if you want, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification button so that you can be notified of when we put new stuff up. And welcome. And I'm not going to tell you about our trials and travails with YouTube and them trying to monetize all of the stuff. Watch the last video we put up and you'll hear the whole sad story and what you can do to help us get around their stupid, greedy behavior.
Yeah.
So there's that. Let's get on.
Let's get the show on the road. All right. So we today are going to be doing another Enneagram, and this time we're going to be doing the Enneagram of sacrifices. And the way that we're couching that today is that we are thinking of these as, it's a deeper Sufi practice to think about sacrifice making.
Yeah, this is a traditional way of working on oneself. It's one of many, and it's suitable for some and not suitable for others.
Yeah.
But it's fun to talk about, and it relates to what we were talking about earlier today. It fits right in with the Conference of the Birds.
It does. There are some really nice parallels that perhaps we'll be able to touch on today, but I just want to offer the hint that when we think about the valleys in the Conference of the Birds, we're going to find some corollaries to those within the Enneagram of sacrifices as well. So, Mushtaq, you should get us started.
All right. First, let me show you what the Enneagram of sacrifice looks like. I will do that by sharing this here screen.
All right, it's popped up for me. Everybody else is good? You can give it a thumbs up. If you're seeing it right now, good. I got at least one.
So we're going to go around the circle first, as we usually do, to look at the movements of the Enneagram in time. And then we will look at the moving lines and the shock points and all of that kind of stuff to help this make sense. So this is, like I said, this is a traditional way of working on yourself. And everybody goes through it to a certain extent. It can be done very specifically. And the first sacrifice is up here at the 9-0 point. And this is an interesting one because nobody can make the sacrifice for themselves. The sacrifice of peace of mind is something that you have to, and I'm going to get rid of that so we don't have to look at it. I want to look at y'all. It has to be made for you, and it's made for you either by somebody who is within the work. Well, it's always somebody who's within the work, maybe living, maybe dead. You might read a book that disturbs you. You might see a video that disturbs you, but it's a matter of being disturbed in a particular way that says, I got to do this. I got to look into this.
So it's catalyzing. It's a catalyzing shock, as we always have in the beginning of the Enneagram. Yep.
Yeah.
Should we tie this explicitly to Conference of the Birds, or would you like to leave that kind of?
I'm going to leave that up to you.
Yeah, okay. So as we might recall, and if you haven't seen that video previously, I certainly recommend to go and watch it. It is posted already, but it's definitely going to enrich this discussion in terms of references to that narrative. So within that narrative, we have the teacher bird who is offering tantalizing parables to get the other birds to be excited about going to find this master bird that is off in some mysterious domain. And this is that entering shock. This is that inspiration, that agitation for something to happen. So keep
Yes.
that in
And
mind.
if you are here listening to us, each of all of every one of you has experienced the shock
Mm.
at some point in your life. Something agitated you to the point where you could no longer be comfortable. And that's the thing about this shock, is it leads directly into shock number one, which is the sacrifice of comfort. So somebody comes along, or you magically find a book, or you see a movie, or you watch a video, maybe you watch The Matrix, and you realize, this isn't a science fiction movie. This is an allegory for my own ego. Something like that. And it gets you to sacrifice number one, the sacrifice of comfort. What can you say about that, Miss Noor?
Well, the sacrifice of comfort is basically letting go of the things that make life easy and enjoyable, the things that keep you attached to the way of life as it's been for you. And what that means is this is where you decide you want to change and you take steps to make that happen despite it being unpleasant. And that could be all kinds of things. It could be, what are some examples for you, Mushtaq, of stuff that keeps you comfortable?
Things that keep you comfortable. There are things like sleep, good food. I'm pulling the image up again so that people can look upon it.
Cool.
And we're right here. The sacrifice of comfort. There are things that we all do, that we all have, that keep us anesthetized. And in order to make this sacrifice, we have to look at the things that make us sleep the most and put them on the altar of sacrifice.
So
we should actually say something about the word sacrifice too, right?
Oh, that's right. We said that we were going to make sure
we were going to do that.
We should take a step back and let's do that.
Yeah. So sacrifice comes from the same root as sacred. And it literally means to offer up something to the divine, or set something aside for the purpose of practice. I'm kind of messing with the definition a little bit. But it comes through the French and the Latin, going all the way back to the Latin, I think. Yeah, all the way back to the Latin, when the idea of setting something aside for the work. So if you sacrifice comfort, you're not punishing yourself. You are taking those things that make you comfortable. And by comfortable, I mean able to sleep comfortably. And you are setting them aside and offering them up to your own work. Does that make sense? I could be blathering. I can't tell at this time of day.
Yeah, let's have a check-in. This is one of those things where I think it's good to have people chime in. What do you think, Nancy? Sydney says it makes sense to her, which is good. Thank you.
It makes sense to me. It would be maybe interesting to look at the difference between appropriate sacrifice of comfort versus self-destructive sacrifice of comfort.
Yeah, things that are self-destructive are not really sacrifices. That's where I kind of come home to. You have, I mean, and you see this in the dervish communities where people will, pierce themselves with skewers and do things that are very painful and lay on beds of nails and things like this. These are not sacrifices. A sacrifice is going out and making sure the street in front of your house is clean when nobody is looking. That would be a real sacrifice.
Yeah. And one thing about this is that you can get comfortable in the sacrifice you're making, which also no longer makes that a sacrifice, correct?
Yes.
So if you get to the point where, let's say you've decided to sleep on a mat on the floor instead of your mattress, and at first, perhaps that feels like a real transition for you. And then after a while, you're just kind of back to being anesthetized despite that change. I mean, perhaps there's a different thing you need to change up at that point.
Yeah. And the thing is that sleeping on a mat on the floor is not a real sacrifice.
Yeah. Well, for some people it might be.
It might be, but those people are rare.
I think it might be hard for my back to sleep on the street.
Yeah, and what would
floor.
you be doing when you're sleeping on the floor? You would be thinking about your back.
Yeah.
You would be feeling miserable. You would not be awake.
Right.
You would be going downhill on Maslow's hierarchy.
Right. Yeah. So I guess that would be an example of self-destructiveness rather than a sacrifice per se. So there we have an example. Yeah. All right. Yeah. I think we have a pretty good grip on that for the moment.
Good. The next sacrifice, and this is a fun one, is the sacrifice of desire. What would you like to say about this, Noor?
Okay, so the sacrifice of the desire in general, this is where we learn to do difficult or unpleasant things that we otherwise dread doing without ego, without seeking approval, recognition, and ideally without the need to be asked to do those things. In that way, this is the realm of providing or, offering service to others from a place of humility. This means you don't draw attention to what you're doing. Mushtaq mentioned in the previous one, you do good acts of service, but you do it kind of in secret. This is kind of like that.
Yeah, this is very much like that. But this is also choosing to be last in all things, but in a way that nobody notices that you're last.
Yeah. You're not spinning it into a way to draw more attention to yourself and your plight and, oh, I just suffer so much, but that's my lot, that kind of thing.
Yeah, or look at me, look how cool I am because I am doing all of these acts of service for everybody.
Yes. Yep.
That's not it either. That's what you have to sacrifice.
Yes, right. So I have a question from Sydney, who is saying, what was the connection of point 1 in the Conference of the Birds? Sorry if I missed that. You didn't miss that. I just wasn't sure. I think we did cover all of the valleys this morning, correct?
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
So, if you think back to the story of the Conference of the Birds, there is the point where the hoopoe gets everybody excited. And then she tells them what they're in for.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the sacrifice of comfort, because all of a sudden they realize to get what it is that they think that they want, there is a price that they have to pay, and the price that they have to pay is their own comfort.
Yep. So there you go, Sydney. Okay, so relating to the sacrifice of desire, Cherie says, doing acts without fanfare. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, this is the classic thing out of the Sermon on the Mount of when you do something good, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. You know, when you pray, pray in secret. When you give alms in secret. Don't do it publicly like the Pharisees do, where they have somebody beating a drum as they're on the way to the temple to make sacrifice to the god.
Yeah, totally beside the point. Yep.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Now, point 3 is
So-
the first shock. Or do you want to do more on this?
Yeah, I was just thinking if we want to answer.
Let's
Susan's-
answer more questions.
Well, I mean, for this one, relevant to the story, this is the second point. The sacrifice of desire is related to the valley of love, and this is, yeah, that's self-effacement. This is that getting over yourself. This is that getting over that idea that you deserve recognition and that, you know, a special seat at the table should belong to you, that kind of thing. This is you stepping back and realizing, I don't, it is probably best for me right now not to be at the forefront in any of the things that I do.
Yeah, only for you. Specifically, it's best if you are at the forefront.
Yeah, well, for me, that means giving up my attachment to safety, perhaps.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that allows me to nap.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So, any questions about the sacrifice of desire? Okay. So we have a comment from Mr. Keen who says, to know what to sacrifice, one needs to know where they are at the moment, or do they sacrifice all at once?
Oh, no, you don't sacrifice all at once. You would burn up. This is
That's
too much
true.
for trying to do everything all at once.
Yeah.
And where you are is at the beginning.
Yep. It's like I mentioned this morning when I was saying, like, a teacher deliberately takes their time in teaching the student new things so that they can digest it and assimilate. It's the same thing here. If we did all this at once, it would be so much more than we could navigate without just falling apart and falling actually into the same old habits that we had from the very beginning when we were still asleep.
Yep. And again, it is good to remember that this set of practices is not for everyone.
That's true. That's, yeah.
Yeah. And that's the value of having that little bird who is going to nag you and say, do this, don't do that, because ideally she knows which practices you should be doing, or at least can point you in that direction. Yep. And keep you safe from the practices that would hurt you.
Yeah, so that's the purpose of having someone farther along the path, particularly of strong skill, guiding you along the way.
Yeah. So for instance, you, Mustaqim, are a householder. You have other lives that you are responsible for, a daughter and a couple of cats. And that means that you are not at this point ready to do all the sacrifices. You can do some of them. But for you, this would be a very slow process right now. Like until your daughter is 18 or 19 years old, and your cats have long gone to paradise.
Yeah, because they're dependent on you. They're dependent on you being available to them, as opposed to perhaps temporarily withdrawing from them for an extended period of time.
Yeah,
Which
so
may or may not be part of releasing comforts, let's say.
yeah, and there are ways to do some of the initial ones almost in secret, so nobody knows that it's happening. But as you get, once you get across the equator, you need your own time to do these. And that gets us to the first shock.
So we're at point 3.
Yes.
This is the sacrifice of illusion.
Yes. There we go, right here, the first shock point.
And we will find this is somewhat tied to the Valley of Knowledge within Conference of the Birds. Because this is about disillusionment with the world of bodies. That's kind of the material realm, the realm of the everyday, the things external to you, to your own, your psyche. And you realize that everything you thought you knew about this material world may not be so, which can be very confusing and very scary. But at this point, that's where you're at. You're talking about the sacrifice of illusion.
Yeah, and the biggest illusion is that your ego means something. Yeah, this is the point where you look and you go, there is no more of this egoic world that I want to have anything to do with. And you begin to withdraw from it.
And yeah, at every step of the way here, there may or may not be people in your life who are balking at what you're trying to do. So especially here, they may feel you pulling away from them. They may feel that sense of distancing from you. Or you from them.
If you make it through this one, you get to point 4, the sacrifice of habits. And this is where the real work begins. Because around your essential self, around your true I, there is a crust of habits, core habits. And around that is another crust of secondary habits. And several layers of habits go out from this center where your I lives. And these need to be cleaned off. But the thing is that as you clean them off, you in certain ways detach yourself from the world. And so as you break your old habits, there comes a point where you have to reinstall new habits. Not very many, just a few that are designed to get you across the equator and to work on the next sacrifices. But you can't function in the world without certain habits, like the habit of breathing. That's not one you want to get away from.
Probably not optional, right?
Yeah, not really.
So what are some habits one might give up, and what are some a person might take on?
If one were me, I'm the only one I don't know what your core habits are, my dear. I only know mine.
Yeah, that's fair, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah. So I had to give up the habit of knowing everything. And that was a big one for me because, one, I'm really smart. And two, I have a lot of data and a lot of knowledge. And three, my ego loves to seem like it's the one that knows and is right. So I had to break that in the most vicious, heartless way I possibly could
Mm.
to allow myself to experience when I'm right and when I'm wrong. And when I'm wrong is more valuable than when I'm right.
So it's almost like there was that defense up.
Yeah,
there.
it's a total defense, and it comes from the fixation at point one.
Right. Which is where I would love to tie this to the Enneagram of fixation. You can use clues from knowledge about your fixation to help you guide yourself
Yeah.
in uncovering this core that needs unpacking. And your fixation is a good starting point for that. And there may be more to that crust of habits around your eye, but at least this gives you a place to begin. And that's as good as any, really, because you got to start somewhere. And as Mushtak and I talked about earlier, you can kind of get a sense of euphoria when you make yourself believe that you've given up a habit that you've done your whole life, and you're like, yes, I'm so in control and everything's going so great. And then you find yourself slipping back into those old habits when you're not
Yeah,
thinking
because
about
they
it.
will try and rebuild
Yeah.
themselves. But even more insidious is that as you actually give up habits, you will get a sense of energy, because every habit that you have is held to you with your own energy. And if you release the habit, you get that energy back.
Interesting.
I use energy as a metaphor here for whatever it is that it really is.
Yeah. Did you experience that yourself?
Oh yeah, every time I manage to give up a habit, and I'm not quite done yet. There may be one or two left.
Yeah.
I get a sense of, oh, there is all of this energy I can use for the work that I didn't have access before because it was holding my habit together.
So let's check in with everyone, because I feel like this
Yeah.
is where we start getting kind of esoteric and
We are
confused.
getting esoteric, but this is an
Yeah.
esoteric crowd.
It is, yes. And I appreciate that a lot. So how's everyone doing so far? Are you able to follow along? Like, what is, yeah, okay. So Mr. Keem says, habit to be awake. Is it a good thing?
Yes, that's one of the habits that you want to create to help you on your way, the habit of awakeness. And that's like checking in with yourself all the time to see if you're awake. You literally develop that as a core habit.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that you're trying to encourage when you tell people,
Yeah.
check in with yourself and ask yourself on a regular, frequent basis throughout a day, am I awake? Am I awake? Because you're creating a habit there. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
And that becomes one of the core habits that you have when you cross the abyss. That's all you get to take with you is your core habits.
Mm-hmm.
And if you take crappy core habits, the stuff that you've done your whole life, you will rebuild your ego on the other side.
Right. So as you said earlier, you cannot do without a set of core habits, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. You need them to literally to be alive.
Yeah.
You
But
know, like
shaping,
breathing is a core habit. Being hungry and eating and feeding your body is a core habit.
but ideally they're in service to awakening.
Yeah, they're in service to your waking up and transcending the mechanical nature that you have adopted since birth.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that there's some kind of a temptation or problem associated with having more energy when you give up your bad habits.
Yeah, it's somewhat intoxicating. And that in itself can become a fixation where you go, oh, I can do more of this and get more of this energy.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like being addicted to any high.
Yeah.
Any gain of functioning where you're just, yeah, I'm going to use this and I'm going to exploit it some more. That kind
Yeah.
of thing.
And it will make you more comfortable.
That's true.
Yeah. And we need a little irritation to get through this.
Yep.
So any other thoughts?
Yeah, the Enneagram doesn't seem to be in any obvious order. And I mean, at least nothing that I can see.
And yet it is.
Yeah, that was a hint.
Yeah. As we look at the moving lines, it will make more sense. But this is definitely a very strict progression. And you have to get through the first before you get to the second. You have to get through the second before you get to the third. And you have to finish each one as you progress around the circle.
Yeah, so this is a bit of a departure from earlier when you were talking about the journey of the birds, in that, as I think it was Louisa who asked earlier, did that journey need to happen in the order that it happened in? And as Mushtaq said, everything kind of happens in that order, but it also happens kind of in this cyclical way where maybe perhaps you're returning to one step along the path and working on that before you move forward to the next one. But here it sounds like this is very much a practical endeavor in which one thing absolutely leads into the next and supports the next. Would you say that's accurate?
That's true, because when you go through the sacrifices, you are usually doing it, almost inevitably doing it under the guidance of a teacher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Who will keep you on the straight and narrow and make sure that you don't jump ahead of yourself or get stuck in some place and go, oh, this feels really good, I think I'll stay here.
Yeah, because then you defeat the entirely.
Yeah.
And similarly, you know, as we read, the birds got lost along the way as well. Sometimes they found a valley that they preferred to stay in and they did not continue forward. So that is one of the risks that a mentor is helping you get through on this. And perhaps it doesn't work out. Perhaps you do get stuck there. But yeah, that's why we need to discuss this so that we all understand why this sequence is the way it is. So where are we?
We are getting ready to hop the equator.
That's right. Yep. So
Yeah.
This is the point of no return.
So here we have the sacrifice of dreams. This is one of the fana. There are 4 fana in this. The first one was back here at the sacrifice of illusion. The sacrifice of dreams is something deeper than the sacrifice of illusions. What can you tell us about this, Miss Noor?
Oh, what can I tell you about this, guys? Okay, so here we have kind of where you realize perhaps that you've been fooling yourself about your spiritual attainment thus far. So this means here you're letting go of fantasies about who and what you are and what you want to be, who you assume you are, and you realize that you are not more quote unquote real in the awake state than you are in your sleeping state, which is to say, you have not in fact escaped your ego yet. So when you find yourself falling into egoic behaviors, you may have felt up to this point or around this point that you've earned yourself a free pass when that happens, but that is not so. So here is where you have to get real. This is where you sacrifice those wishful thinkings that you've held about yourself and about where you're at.
Yeah, when you are at point 3 at the third sacrifice, you're sacrificing the outer world. At point 6, you're sacrificing the inner world, where you realize that your inner world and all of your spiritual aspirations are as meaningless as the outer world. So just as you realize that trying to attain a particular position at work that gives you more money and all of this is functionally kind of meaningless. It's okay if you do it, but don't be attached to it. But at the same time, you realize that your inner aspiration to be seen as an enlightened being, or to be a teacher, or to receive special initiations and all of that is
Be
equally
famous,
be famous is equally illusionary. And everybody who I have ever known who wanted to be a famous teacher failed at this point. They never made it past this.
And you've said that this is the hardest, in a sense,
Yeah.
it's the hardest point. This is
It
where
is the hardest,
you
yeah.
really have to haul ass and not get trapped, not get wrapped up in your own story about who you are and what you're doing.
Yep. And not to allow yourself to succumb to the perks of the path.
Yeah. So let's say you've attained some special abilities. They're nothing. Like it's you need to accept that they don't make you special.
Yes. Or let's say lots and lots of people are now looking at you and going, wow, you have something to say. You would be better off snorting heroin than listening to that as a teacher. You guys are okay because for you, it's good. For me or for Noor, who have put ourselves in the position of being a teacher, that's poisonous. Because eventually you'll start believing your own press, and then it's all downhill from there.
Yeah, and we've talked about that.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Mustaqim.
Yes.
Do you let people who choose to stay in the valley, do you let people choose to stay in the valley that they feel comfortable in?
Of course, it's not a matter of us letting them. They have free will.
Well,
I would not stopping somebody. Yeah.
This is where personal agency and, not allowing, God, these words are so difficult to navigate, but
respecting people's choices, even when they're incredibly stupid.
Not getting in the way of their, of
their path. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And even if you were a high exalted teacher, you don't know everything. You know the story of Moses and the madman, right? Even if you do, I'm going to tell it to you guys anyway. So here's Moses, and he's walking along through the desert, along the river, and he sees this guy, and the guy is rolling on the ground. And then the guy jumps up and he spins around in the air, and then he drops down and he rolls around again. And then he jumps up and he spins around, and Moses comes up to him and says, "What are you doing?" The guy says, "I'm praying." And Moses says, "That's not how you pray." And Moses, being the kindly person that he is, teaches the guy how to pray. And then Moses walks off and he comes to a place where he has to cross the river. And since there's no boat, he goes walking across the water. And as he's about halfway out, the crazy guy comes running up to him, also walking across the water, and says, "Oh, sir, I am so sorry. I forgot some of your instruction. Can you go over it with me again?" And Moses looks at him standing on the water and says, "Just do as you were doing. Just do as you were doing." And that's part of the reason why we don't try and force people to finish something that we think that they should finish. If they go, "Yeah, this is where I need to be," you can give them that and say, "If you ever need to move on, you know how to get a hold of me."
Yep. Yep. Been there.
Yep. And this is part of, as somebody who is a teacher, you have to be able to do this. You cannot hold on to your students.
Yeah. I mean, this is where our detachment comes in.
Yeah.
Of course,
And
you
all of
feel
you are going to
care,
be in this
but
position, believe it or not. Every single one of you are going to be in the position of knowing that you have to let somebody be as they are, and you cannot force them to change.
mhm. This especially happens as children grow up, even.
Yeah, it happens as children grow up. It happens in relationship, and it especially happens with your students. Because remember, of the thousands of birds who started out on the journey in the Conference of the Birds, only 30 made it to the end.
Speaking of, this would be somewhat in tandem with the Valley of Unity.
Yes.
Yep. Yep. In the previous one, I don't know if I mentioned, sacrifice of habits is roughly in line with the Valley of Detachment.
Yep. So let's take a look at the sacrifice of attributes, the sixth shock. How are we doing on time? We're actually zipping through these.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about the sacrifice of attributes, Nora.
All right. So, as we mentioned, this is where we have that third shock, because we've already had the initial shock, and then we've had the 3-point shock. And my mistake, don't we have one at 5 as well?
Well, no, we have a fana at 5, but it's
Got
not
it.
the quality of the shock. This is the quality of a shock.
Okay, yeah, we'll save that for another day, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is where we are, everything is crumbling. This is roughly in line with the Valley of Wonderment, of bewilderment. So this is where one gives up their human and divine qualities and any special powers, all the things that have been cultivated and shaped and trimmed and fed and all that stuff up to this point, and you let them go so that you're allowing yourself to be completely aligned and dependent upon the one, shall we say.
Yeah,
And
the
as
divine attributes
yeah,
rather than your own.
exactly. And this is kind of as, the birds have realized, oh my gosh, I don't know if I understand anything. I feel like suddenly the world and everything in it and inside myself is unfamiliar, and yet I feel drawn to it. I feel drawn forward despite not knowing what comes next.
Yeah. And with that comes the, oh my God, I have these attributes that make my life easier.
Yeah.
I have karamat. Karamat are charismatic powers that you can get through your spiritual practice. And they make your life easy. And you have to let them go. You have to let go of all the attributes in order to make the space for the one to write the divine attributes on your essence. That's very poetic. I like that.
So much poetry today. So, any questions so far?
Yeah, I was wondering whether that was ordinary attributes, like thinking you're a certain kind of person, or is it
Yeah, that's part of
specifically
it.
Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, a lot of that is already kind of chiseled away at this point, and here we have the things that you have worked hard to make yourself into. So you've given up your habits, you've given up your images of yourself, and what remains still needs to go. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just because it's new and improved doesn't mean you're at the end of the project. Yeah. So that leaves us. Any
With
other
the next
questions?
one.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, let me
Number
pull it up
7.
again. Number 7 is the sacrifice of ordinary existence. And this is an interesting one. You notice that the 7 line runs back to 1. And you know when that happens, you've completed an octave. The sacrifice of ordinary existence. What can you tell us about that, Noor?
Well, first of all, we can see this as kind of correlating to the valley of poverty and annihilation as talked about in the conference of the birds. But for our purposes right now, we can see this as, yeah, okay. So this also correlates with the point in the story where all these ragged survivor birds have made it through the journey and they've arrived at the door of the great bird, the Simur. So here, as Mushtaq said, you have reached a point of real skill. You've cultivated a sense of humility that has brought you to a point where you're able to share your wisdom with others without bringing attention to yourself. And you take on, returning to 1, all the tasks of the sacrifice of comfort. But instead of in the beginning where you were just, your skills of intention, attention, and presence were really kind of in their baby stage. At this point, you can bring that fully to the table in your acts of service and in your letting go of the things that keep you comfortable and asleep.
Yeah, this is a hard one, and very few people accomplish it because you have to. This is the point where your teacher usually sends you out to teach, but in such a way that nobody notices that they're being taught. You become an agent of the sacrifice of peace of mind, but in a way that is completely humble and in complete humility. So for me, the perfect example of this, and some of you have heard this story, and some of you have known other people who have met this guy. There used to be a hamburger joint that was on Route 66 going through Schleichman, Arizona. Route 66 used to go right through the middle of this town. And in this hamburger joint was an enlightened being. There's no way that you would know that he was an enlightened being, but he sold his hamburgers and his milkshakes in such a way that it transformed people. I kid you not.
Yep.
And people would go in and they would walk out not exactly the same people. They would have received a shock to their system. And Cherie knows who I'm talking about. Are you still here, Cherie, or did you have to take off?
She's here. She's
okay.
Just hanging out.
Yeah, because her other teacher spent hours watching this happen once, or maybe even twice. And it affected him too. He was transformed by being at this place. And there was nothing out of the ordinary about this guy. He was so normal that you would not pick him out in a crowd. And yet he was a profound teacher.
You
And
can't really fake that, can you?
no, you can't fake that. And I consider myself forever blessed to have accidentally stumbled on this place in my travels. So the sacrifice of ordinary existence is to live an utterly plain, humble, ordinary life while being an agent of transformation, basically. But in a way that no one will ever notice.
Yep.
And that gets us to number 8, the sacrifice of the heart.
Do we have a question? I think we have a. Mr. Keene says, are these sacrifices transactional? Are they in essence like one sacrifices something and gets something in return?
No. If you sacrifice something and think that you're going to get something in return, the sacrifice will not work.
Yeah.
You have to absolutely give up all hope of any return on this.
This kind of ties to desire.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the sacrifice of the heart, what can we say about this?
Ooh, Mr. Keene says that's scary. Yes.
Yes, it is very scary, terrifying even.
I don't blame you for finding that pretty scary, because it is. Yep. Okay. So yeah, sacrifice of the heart. So following along with the story, we can say this is where the 30 birds meet the Simur, the bird that they sought, this master bird. And this is when they realize that it is in fact they who are collectively the Simur, the master bird. And of course, that's a huge shock to the system. It means you are, yeah. Say more about this, Mushtaq.
So at this point, you perceive that you are a reflection of the divine unity. And this allows you to move from your lower centers to your higher centers. The sacrifice of the heart is all about opening the higher centers. And in order to do that, you have to sacrifice the lower centers. So you sacrifice thought for wisdom, the higher intellectual center. You sacrifice feeling for discernment, and open up the higher emotional center. And there is actually a higher form of the moving center, which allows you to be in a position of in alignment with creation, is the way I like to think of it. And all this requires is you give up the patterns of thought that you have and the patterns of emotions that are the lower emotional center, the lower feeling center. So that's your sacrifice. And when you make that sacrifice, you make room for this higher reflection. There's a story. The Shah of Iran sent a bunch of artists to have a contest with Chinese artists at the emperor's palace in China. And the emperor said, to find out which of you is the greater artist, we are going to give you each one big room, and you are going to put your art in this room. And when you're done, we're going to open the doors and see what we see. And I will choose who is the greatest artist. So the Chinese got in there and they did these beautiful, elaborate paintings in the way that only they can do. And, you know, it took them a year to do it. And at the same time, over in where the Iranis are working, you hear this rub, 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 shuka, 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 rub, 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 shuka, 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 shuka. And after a year, the emperor comes in and he says, throw open the doors. And they throw open the doors to both the Chinese and the Iranian rooms at the same time. And the Chinese rooms have this incredible, beautiful, elaborate mural. But what the Iranian artists had done is they had polished the walls of their room so that their room perfectly reflected the art in the other room. And the emperor allowed us how that was a higher form of art than he had ever seen before, and declared the Iranians the winners of this contest. So in that same way, at this point, you are polishing the mirror of your heart to reflect only that which is presented to you by the unity. And in order to do that, you have to let go of your lower centers. You have to allow your lower centers to evolve. Does that make sense, or am I waxing too poetic?
Well, I mean, I don't know how much familiarity people have with the centers yet, so.
Yeah, I'm assuming that those of us who are here have at least some familiarity with it. And anybody not can ask us in the comments, and we will give them full and detailed answers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Zainab, have you ever heard that story?
No.
Dang.
Do we have any questions before we move on? Or thoughts? Sydney, how are you doing? I understand that you may have to not go on video to preserve your bandwidth, but just wanted to check in with you. And Jonathan too, how are you
I'm doing good.
Good.
I'm doing fine, thank you.
All right, cool. Yeah.
Good.
And if you have, do you have any thoughts you want to share, Jonathan, so far, or you want to wait till we get a little further
Just
along?
that it seems like a very high level, this octave that we're doing this morning and this evening. This is high level stuff, difficult. I'm just letting it absorb into my head. I can't really, I'm not going to make myself believe I can understand this.
I think that's probably the best way to start, is to just get in.
And you're absolutely right. This is some high level shit here. This is high octane. And, you know, most people never get to hear this. Or if they do, it's explained in ways that don't make sense or whatever, or they don't care. But we figured, what the heck, we'll do this. And next week, we'll go back to something simpler.
Yeah, but this just feels like it's really worth delving into with the Conference of the Birds, for example, fresh in our minds. So it really is a journey.
Yeah, and that gets us to point 9.
Yes.
Which is the sacrifice of essence. This is known as fana fizat, literally the annihilation of essence. And this is in the Conference of the Birds that we talked about earlier today. This is where all of the birds dissolve into the reflection that they see of themselves as, becoming the divine unity. And seemingly for 1,000 years or 100 years or whatever it is, they reside in this state of union and then are brought back completely transformed. So
Yes,
that's this last state.
Yeah, so this is where you reemerge in essence, grounded in essence, unburdened of the ego. That's what this transformation is. And so what that means, it's basically the complete defacement and dissolution of your individual essence into a union, a seamless union with the divine essence. An individual will becomes seamlessly merged with divine will, because in fact, they have always been one and the same.
And Mustaqim has a question here.
Yeah. So Mustaqim asks, reaching the sacrifice of essence means the work is finished, no more sacrifices?
Basically, yes. At its highest level. If you're just doing this a little, this can be done as a mini course, as it were, in which case you have to go around the Enneagram many times.
Yeah.
But basically, when you get to this one, the work is done.
Yeah.
And you move on to a higher octave.
And who knows about that one?
Yeah, I'll let you know when I get there.
Yeah. Yep.
So real quick, I want you to get you guys to take a look at the moving lines to help you understand this. You have the 3 shock points, right? The sacrifice of illusion, the sacrifice of attributes, and the sacrifice of essence. But the moving lines at 1 looks to 4. Your comfort, your sacrifice of comfort shows you where your habits are. And it looks back to 7, or the teacher is looking back to 7, to say, okay, if I can get this student to make the sacrifice of habits, they're going to get to the point where they can sacrifice their ordinary existence and allow themselves to move into a place that can actually affect real change in the world. At 2, the sacrifice of desire, you also look at habits. You're looking down there going, your habits create your desires. And so in order to get to your habits, you have to get through your desires. And you look back also to 8 and go, okay, in order to really do this, I have to be thinking about transforming my centers from the lower to the higher. At 5, you look at the sacrifice of ordinary existence and the sacrifice of the heart. And you have to realize that your dreams are what keep you in place. You can't sacrifice your ordinary existence until you sacrifice your dreams. Mm-hmm. You cannot sacrifice your lower centers until you sacrifice the dreams that are attached to those lower centers. And so that's how the moving lines work on this. Does that make sense? I kind of went a little fast because have gone a little bit over, and Noor and I are so tired from getting up early this morning so that we could do both of these things that we're slurring our words.
Yeah, but we want to make sure by checking in with you guys if this is making sense, if this feels like something you can take a look at and just draw a little bit of inspiration from, or a little bit of, yeah, I think we should start there, a little bit
Yeah.
of inspiration. I'm going to poke at people.
Okay,
Zainab,
I'm going to stop the
yeah.
share.
We do have a question from Sydney, but I want to get to that in a moment. So far, Zainab, how are you doing with this stuff today?
Good.
Yeah? Yeah. You've had a long day.
Yeah, you're up there with us today.
Yep. Yeah.
I'm not sure if I understand the sacrifice of illusion. I'm sorry, sacrifice of attributes.
Okay.
Can you just a little bit elaborate on that, Mushtaq?
Okay. What do you think, Noor? Sacrifice of attributes.
Sacrifice of attributes.
I would like to make sacrifice of automobiles.
For real. Well, we talked here about, all along the way up until this point, you've been kind of trying to cultivate yourself on the level of improving your ego, basically. And of course, you're doing that all along the way. But here is where you really hit that wall of like, wow, am I going to let this go or not? Uh-oh. And it can be very terrifying to get to this place of bewilderment where you told yourself like, I'm a good person, I'm loyal to my path, I have struggled to be a compassionate person, and I think I've made that happen. And perhaps you've been given certain, as Mishtak mentioned, like charismatic things that have come up for you as a result of your striving to become a quote unquote better person. And here's where you realize I need to let all of that fall away. And what I need to do is open myself up to the divine will.
Yeah,
Would you
this
say
is
that's
where
about
you
right?
start polishing your mirror,
Yeah.
because you want to, when you are in the presence of the unity, you want to be able to reflect that.
Mhm. Yeah.
There's a passage in the Conference of the Birds that we couldn't get to today that basically says, if you've done the work, and I'm paraphrasing here, if you've done the work and you come to the ocean of the one, you are like a clear drop, and you will drop into the ocean and you will dissolve, and you and the ocean are one. But if you have not, if you still have the dross of life on your soul, then it's like having a little stone in the middle of that drop, and it's dropped into the water, and that stone, which is your ego, just goes to the bottom of the sea.
You're still in it. You're still part of the
Yeah.
sea, but
Yeah, you still have that identity that keeps you from being one with everything.
mhm. Yep.
And so the sacrifice of attributes is sacrificing that little pebble,
Yeah.
which is the I-ness.
Yeah. And you may have, through pressure and time, shaped that into some kind of gemstone, but it doesn't matter. You still got to let it go. Still got to let it go.
I'm wondering if the birds had each had an attribute as well.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't really get into that this morning because it would have added a whole other hour to the discussion.
2 hours
probably.
to the
Yeah.
discussion, just going through the birds that are mentioned by name.
Yep.
In the beginning of the poem, it goes through the qualities of each of the birds. And, that shows their human attributes or their bird attributes, and hints at the divine attribute that they will one day embody. You find that in the Hupo's commentary on each of the birds.
So anyone who gets a chance to actually read the story, I suggest taking some time to think about what Zainab has brought up.
Yep, and we will link this morning's video in here, but let's get Sydney's question.
Yeah. So Sydney asks, or rather says, I may be out of left field, but does the 3 shock of human adulthood, sacrifice of the sand grain, fractionate in this Enneagram? Words. Definitely having a hard time pronouncing.
Okay, I'll help you here.
Help.
The answer is yes. Yes, these tend to be fractal in nature, and the 3 shock is like this. So briefly,
yeah, because that's the personal will point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So there we have it.
Cool. Do we have any last thoughts or questions?
Yeah, I'm going to switch over to Brady Bunch mode.
Yeah, let's
so
do
we
that.
can see everybody.
Cherie, thanks for sticking around. What are your thoughts?
It's like we're given certain things to help us to begin our journey, but they do and can become a handicap to our growth. And the word sacrifice, I can also use the word surrender. When I actually willingly surrender those particular things, my dreams, illusions, attributes, whatever, the things that I'm good at, all of those things are very hard to give up because you're identified with them and you feel like they're so useful, you can't let them go. And who are you without those things? Who are you when you become really, truly aligned with the divine? It is a scary thing that Mushtaq says, and I agree with that, but it's so liberating when you start surrendering it, yielding it, letting it go. The sacrifice of that doesn't become so painful. It doesn't have to be so painful, but it's when you actually thrill in the will of the divine, that's when it's like, oh, you get glimpses of that and it spurs you on. So that's all I can say to that. That's how I see it. I think, oh, that's so good. Now I can do that because I can get lost in the gift. I can get lost in the doing. I can get lost in don't look at me, don't point at me, don't make me speak. But when you're actually feeling that, where am I in the divine will? Am I aligned with that? Am I trying to flow with that? Am I trying to operate within that? It just becomes wonderful. It is a wonderful thing. It's like a light on life. Is that
Thank
okay?
you so much. Yeah, that's great. No, I mean, as you said, sometimes I know we put you on the spot, but you definitely come through.
And on that note, I have to depart. So
yeah, go for it.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you for coming.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
All right, and I think that it's time to turn off the recording now.
Okay,
so
let's
everybody,
wave goodbye to everyone
wave
on
goodbye,
YouTube.
and we'll see you all next week.